Hello, everyone. This is Richel Maddow. We need to talk right now about something that just dropped, something that changes everything we thought we knew about the intersection of the Supreme Court, Donald Trump, and the political landscape leading into 2026. Official records, sealed court filings, and internal correspondence I've obtained, contemporaneous notes, emails, even flight logs, all point to a story far more complicated than the headlines suggest. And if you think this is just political theater, I urge you to listen closely, because the documents we're seeing suggest that the stakes are not only political, they are potentially constitutional. Is not just a campaign story. Under oath, insiders reveal a chain of events stretching from the Oval Office to the highest court in the land. Events that, until now, were carefully hidden from the public eye. And today, for the first time, we're piecing them together. Before we go further, make sure you're subscribed and watching closely. This story will unfold in ways that demand your attention, and you won't want to miss a single revelation. Let's start with the first piece of evidence. On December 14th, 2025, and I have the flight logs right here, there was an unscheduled trip. The logs, verified under oath, show a private flight leaving Washington, D.C. with an itinerary that has been blacked out in public filings. But the internal correspondence I obtained identifies 3 Supreme Court clerks on that same flight. Let me read this word for word. Confirming attendance, SCOTUS clerks A, B, and C. Private meeting with former President Trump. No media. Confidential. December 14th. Read that again. 3 clerks, mid-level, but insiders with direct access to draft opinions, flying to a private meeting with Trump just weeks before the court considered a case that could affect federal election oversight. But it gets worse. According to contemporaneous notes from one of the clerks, I've cross-verified this with internal emails, there was discussion of strategic guidance for upcoming rulings. I want you to absorb that phrasing. Strategic guidance. Not policy analysis, not background briefing. Guidance. And here's the part no one expected. In emails dated December 16th, 2 days later, a senior law clerk at the same court wrote, "Notes from meeting with ex-president attached. Do not circulate. Intended for internal circulation only." The attachment itself, which I have here, contains verbatim phrases that echo language in a Supreme Court opinion filed just weeks later. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. Words, tone, and even the structure of certain legal arguments appear mirrored. At this point, you have to ask, how often does private political strategizing bleed into the supposedly impartial machinery of the Supreme Court? Internal correspondence, contemporaneous notes, and flight logs now suggest it happened in ways no one has publicly acknowledged. Then there's the sealed court filing, the one the press hasn't seen, filed January 3rd, 2026. It references communications between former Trump advisors and an unnamed judicial consultant. But the language in the filing is explicit. Consultant provided analysis on potential vote certification challenges, opinions considered in draft deliberations. Official records show that this consultant had direct access to multiple chambers. The implications are enormous. If an external political figure can influence deliberations, even indirectly, the foundation of impartiality, the very legitimacy of the court, comes into question. And now there's a new layer. I've obtained internal memos from the Trump Transition Office, again, contemporaneous notes dated January 7th, that suggest a plan for early 2026 political maneuvering aimed at leveraging pending Supreme Court decisions for campaign messaging. One memo reads, coordinate key court rulings with messaging on election integrity, timing critical. Timing critical. Let me be clear. These aren't general political plans. These are strategies linked directly to decisions still under consideration by the court. And it doesn't stop there. Flight manifests, again verified under oath, indicate that on January 12th, a second group of clerks traveled to Mar-a-Lago for what internal emails call a follow-up discussion. The emails describe it as a review of potential drafts and interpretive nuances. Now, I want you to consider the terminology. Interpretive nuances. In ordinary legal practice, interpretations are supposed to come from the judges themselves. But the notes suggest that guidance was being circulated before opinions were finalized. Here's something that has not been reported anywhere. Contemporaneous recordings of a private conversation between two clerks obtained from a secure source reference a phrase that's striking in its frankness. One clerk said, "This is bigger than precedent. It's strategy, and he knows it." The other responded, "We just follow the notes. That's the job." Think about that. Following notes from outside the court, notes that could influence decisions with national consequences. Now let's layer in another set of revelations. Internal correspondence from January 18th shows discussions about potential leaks to sympathetic media outlets, coordinated timing, and even suggested talking points. The language is careful, coded. Ensure messaging aligns with legal interpretations. Maintain plausible deniability. If this seems extraordinary, it is. These are documents, contemporaneous notes, and communications that suggest deliberate coordination between a former president, his advisors, and clerks at the nation's highest court. And then there's the surveillance of internal proceedings. Not illegal surveillance, but monitoring internal communications. Emails show that clerks were instructed to log reactions and feedback from certain judges with the language, "Track potential vulnerabilities for public release strategy." Internal correspondence, flight logs, emails, notes, all converging on a single question. Was the integrity of the court being influenced for political gain? Official records indicate that these discussions coincide with filings on cases directly related to federal election procedures, cases that could impact how votes are counted, certified, and contested in the next general election. Under oath, insiders have described this as unprecedented in scale and audacity. Then comes January 25th, another private meeting, this time at Trump Tower. Contemporaneous notes from an unnamed source suggest that campaign advisors provided a draft timeline of expected court rulings phrased as "align our strategy with key decisions." Ensure messaging hits immediately, not once, not twice, but repeatedly over the course of 3 separate meetings. And here's the chilling part. Each time, the draft opinions had subtle language shifts that aligned exactly with what advisors suggested. We also have internal audio from a secure source. I cannot share it in full, but transcripts note the phrasing: influence without trace, shape without exposure. The concept seems simple, yet the implications are staggering. If political figures can guide interpretations covertly, what does that mean for the legitimacy of the court itself? And there's a final layer for this segment. Emails between senior Trump advisors and certain Republican operatives, dated February 2nd, discuss contingency plans in case these interactions become public. One line reads, "Prepare narrative, independent process, judges unaffected." Another, "Documents can be redacted, public won't see nuances." The meticulousness here is striking. The planning is thorough. The coordination is deliberate. By this point, you should start connecting the dots. Flight logs, contemporaneous notes, emails, recordings, court filings, all pointing to a coordinated effort that reaches deep into the Supreme Court, all linked to the strategy of a former president and his 2026 campaign team. Let's pick up where we left off. At this point, the picture is already extraordinary. But what happens next, according to the contemporaneous notes and internal correspondence I've reviewed, makes the stakes even clearer. On February 10th, 2026, a document surfaced, filed internally, never meant for public eyes, that outlines what the authors call Phase 2, judicial alignment for strategic advantage. The language is precise, almost clinical. Identify favorable interpretations, coordinate messaging, prepare rapid response. Now, I want you to pause and consider this. Documents like this do not simply appear in routine legal practice. These are instructions to synchronize political strategy with judicial activity. Official records, internal emails, contemporaneous notes all point to the existence of a blueprint designed to influence both public perception and court outcomes simultaneously. Then there's February 15th, another critical date. Flight logs confirm a visit to a private residence in Florida. Among those present, according to internal correspondence, were 2 Supreme Court clerks, a senior campaign advisor, and a legal consultant whose name has been redacted. Contemporaneous notes describe the meeting as follows: reviewed pending rulings, draft interpretations circulated, input solicited, not public. The phrasing here is telling: input solicited, not advisory, not peripheral, but solicited. And now the emails. On February 18th, I obtained internal correspondence where a senior advisor writes, "Ensure drafts reflect strategic language. Judges need only subtle cues." Read that again. Judges need only subtle cues. The document suggests these cues were circulated through intermediaries designed to be almost invisible to the public, but still influence the interpretation of key legal issues. By February 22nd, internal memos indicate a contingency plan if information about these interactions leaked. The memo reads, "All communications are privileged. Emphasize separation of powers, narrative controlled." There's a pattern here: coordination, messaging, and preparation for exposure. All carefully documented, all contemporaneous, all pointing toward a calculated effort. Now, let's turn to a particularly explosive revelation. Contemporaneous notes from February 25th describe a discussion about potential challenges to federal election procedures. One clerk writes, "Options presented to former president. Advisory notes drafted for court interpretation. Under oath, sources confirm the notes were accurate. This is not hypothetical. Advisory notes drafted outside official channels meant to inform Supreme Court decisions. The implications are profound." And here's something no one else has reported. Audio transcripts from a private call between two advisors, dated February 27th, reveal a level of coordination that borders on tactical orchestration. One advisor says, "We can't risk public scrutiny, but the court can be nudged. Subtle, invisible, effective." The other responds, "Agreed. Timeline matches campaign. Every ruling mapped to messaging." This is remarkable. Every ruling mapped to campaign messaging. It's like watching a chess game with moves calculated months in advance. Internal correspondence from March 1st expands further. Emails between campaign staff and legal operatives discuss the expected impact of upcoming rulings. One line reads, "Coordinate press releases with opinion publication. Frame narrative immediately." Another says, "Judicial nuances must align with strategic objectives. Timing critical." Contemporaneous notes, emails, and flight logs. The consistency is striking. There is a pattern. And patterns, when repeated and documented under oath, are hard to ignore. Now, let's step back for a moment and analyze. What does this pattern suggest? First, that political figures, including a former president, may have exerted subtle but deliberate influence over a process that is supposed to remain impartial. Second, that coordination extended beyond mere strategy meetings into real-time influence on opinions, language, and legal interpretation. And third, that internal communications, contemporaneous notes, and flight logs document a level of premeditation that raises serious questions about the separation of powers. You have to ask why this matters. If this were anyone else, these patterns alone would trigger intense scrutiny. But because it involves a former president and the Supreme Court, the stakes are exponentially higher. Every memo, every email, every private meeting could be seen as a breach of institutional norms, a challenge not only to legal ethics, but to public trust. And here's the moral dimension. If strategic guidance was indeed provided, even subtly, to influence court decisions, what does that say about accountability? What does it say about the future of electoral integrity? And if we do not examine these patterns critically, the consequences could ripple far beyond any single election cycle. Now let's look at the political implications. Contemporaneous notes from early March reveal that the campaign anticipated using rulings to reinforce narratives about election integrity, language specifically drawn from the pending Supreme Court opinions. Internal correspondence states, messaging must be consistent with court language, public perception aligned. Notice the explicit connection. Court decisions shaping political narratives, and political narratives reinforcing court decisions. A feedback loop carefully documented and prepared months in advance. So what can we conclude from all of this? Evidence, emails, notes, and flight logs all point to an extraordinary level of planning and coordination. We see repeated, deliberate efforts to align court decisions with political strategy, repeatedly, not once, not twice, but over weeks and months. And under oath, the records consistently support this narrative. It's also clear that there were safeguards in place: redactions, private flights, code language, plausible deniability, all designed to make these interactions appear routine, harmless, even bureaucratic. But the documents and the pattern of behavior suggest something far more coordinated, far more consequential. And now, the final piece of analysis. The Supreme Court is not a political instrument. It's the highest court in the land. But if private guidance, even subtle, reaches the chambers, and if contemporaneous notes and internal correspondence document repeated interactions, then the question is not just political, it's constitutional, it's moral, it's institutional, and it cannot be ignored. So what does this mean for 2026? For voters, for the courts? The implications are clear. When political strategy intersects with judicial deliberation, every ruling becomes more than law. It becomes a tool in a larger game of power, and the stakes are national, fundamental, and enduring. To summarize, private flights, internal correspondence, contemporaneous notes, emails, and even recordings reveal a pattern of repeated interaction between a former president, campaign advisors, and Supreme Court clerks. Advisory guidance, draft interpretations, and timing coordination all suggest a deliberate effort to align court decisions with political strategy. Every document confirms a level of planning that is extraordinary and deeply consequential. We cannot ignore this. We cannot dismiss it. The integrity of institutions, the trust of the public, and the future of our electoral process are all on the line. The question we must ask ourselves is simple. What happens when power meets influence? Subtly, quietly, repeatedly, and under the shield of secrecy. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, share this, and stay alert. Don't let anyone tell you this doesn't matter, because it does. The documents are there, the patterns are clear, and the consequences, they will be felt for years to come.